room felt cold in that quiet 1993 building, and those agents kept whispering like the name alone carried trouble, and one of them said that if this man walked free, then half the city would not sleep again. Stacks of files covered the table with bodies and dates, but not a single witness name anywhere. Everything pointed to one shadow moving through every corner without leaving fingerprints on anything. Nobody wanted to say his name first. Before anyone understood the full picture, his story had already spread in the streets. This how a kid from Southwest turned into the shadow everybody in DC crossed the street to avoid. Southwest DC in the late 60s carried those tight rows of blocks where kids played ball in the streets while older men watched corners, and families tried to keep their homes steady inside a city shifting fast around them. Wayne Perry grew up right inside that 203 section where everybody knew everybody, and weekends felt loud with uncles grilling food and cousins running around. People said he moved smooth even as a kid, and the coaches noticed how fast he learned every sport they put in front of him. His name landed in the Washington Star more than once because he hit baseballs hard and threw punches clean inside youth boxing events, and older girls smiled at him early since he carried himself with confidence. The story gets complicated when you look at the figures standing around him, because one older guy named Lop carried weight in the neighborhood, and Wayne followed his style closely, learning the way dice tables worked and how hustlers moved when money got tight. He was young but watched everything with sharp eyes, and he picked up lessons on posture and tone from men who lived by different rules. People said Wayne lived two separate lives back then, showing up to practices as a star athlete during the daylight hours, then hanging around the side streets after dark, listening to the older boys talk about robberies, gambling tricks, and reputations. Summers changed him even more because he spent them in rural Georgia where the air felt heavy and the racism stayed close enough to touch daily, and he fought often because he refused to let anybody disrespect him for any reason. Those long months sharpened his temper and toughened his pride, and every fall he returned to DC carrying a little more anger and a little more certainty that standing down was never an option. That built a stubbornness in him because he believed people only respected strength, and he brought that belief home every year. Wayne liked telling stories about his early violence, and he once claimed he put somebody in the ground at 12 years old after an argument turned physical. Nobody knows if that was true, but the kids around him repeated it until it sounded real enough. By 13, he started selling small amounts on the street and moved like someone who trusted his instincts more than any adult. Those early claims shaped his reputation long before he earned it, and teenagers in Southwest whispered about him like he was already dangerous even though he still looked young. Everything in that era pushed him toward the streets slowly because he had the athletic gifts to become somebody clean, but he liked the attention that came from older hustlers more than praise from coaches. People remember him walking into gyms with a crowd of classmates behind him, then walking out later that night toward the same dice houses those older boys controlled. Wayne carried himself like someone ready to step into whatever role the neighborhood offered, and the neighborhood offered roles that rewarded confidence more than caution. The legend of Wayne Perry did not start with a headline or a major crime scene because it started right here in those small moments where a kid learned how to switch identities depending on the crowd standing in front of him. He listened closely to men who survived rough corners, and he copied their quiet walk and their calm reaction to danger. Those traits stacked quietly until one day he was no longer the talented kid playing ball for the neighborhood, but the young teen everyone whispered about with a mix of curiosity and warning. Those early years shaped everything that followed because every lesson, every fight, and every corner shaped the version of Wayne that DC would eventually fear. And the legend people whispered about started long before his name hit any federal paperwork. Wayne stepped into Wilson High carrying that same confidence he learned on the Southwest blocks, and the students already knew his name because his athletic skills had reached classrooms before he ever arrived. The school held its own tensions since Southwest kids and Northwest kids argued constantly over neighborhoods, and those arguments turned loud inside crowded hallways. One afternoon, everything boiled over when both groups clashed during passing time and fists started swinging before teachers reacted. The hallway turned chaotic once someone pulled out a gun, and a hall monitor fell after a shot cut through the noise. Police swarmed the school quickly and grabbed Wayne because several students pointed at him, even though nobody mentioned who actually held the gun. The arrest placed his name inside the juvenile system, and the school expelled him before the investigation cooled down. His reputation traveled faster than the facts, and people around Southwest started telling each other that Wayne carried a dangerous edge now. The bat incident happened not long after the school chaos, and Wayne had been transferred to an alternative baseball program that tried giving troubled kids a path back into sports. Tension grew between Wayne and his baseball coach during practice, and the coach pushed him too far during a drill. Wayne snapped during an argument and grabbed a bat, then struck the coach hard until staff members pulled him away. The program removed him immediately, and the DC school system barred him from every public school across the city. A judge eventually ordered him into a GED program to finish his education. Although he barely showed interest because his focus leaned toward the streets now, that moment made adults step back from him. And neighbors began noticing that Wayne only listened to the older hustlers standing outside corner stores. During those GED days, Wayne claimed another violent moment that shaped the way people talked about him, and the story spread across Southwest through teenagers who admired toughness. He said someone tried snatching his chain during an argument, and he handled the situation permanently because disrespect carried a heavy price in his mind. Nobody knows what happened exactly, but his confidence while telling the story made younger boys believe him fully. The chain incident made him sound colder and more dangerous, and he let people assume whatever they wanted because the rumors helped him during street conflicts. This story should not be framed as dramatic or mythical because it simply shows how Wayne measured respect and survival inside that environment. Wayne's early street reputation grew heavy during the late 70s and early 80s because older stick-up boys started using him during robberies. They trusted his heart, but they didn't trust his control, and they removed bullets from his gun before hitting licks since they worried he might shoot someone quickly. They liked bringing him along because he didn't freeze under pressure, and he moved with complete confidence around dangerous men. Younger kids in Southwest avoided messing with him because he responded aggressively to small confrontations, and people liked saying that Wayne never bluffed when trouble came toward him. His name popped up inside stories about fights and stick-ups around the Greenleaf area, and people described him as the type who walked into rooms silently because he wanted others to approach him first. He started carrying himself like someone building his own path in DC's underground world, and that shift from promising athlete to feared teenager began shaping everything that followed. Those high school years marked a permanent turn for Wayne because every institution that could have helped him stepped away after the violent incidents, and he felt more understood by the streets than by any adult figure. His reputation traveled through neighborhoods quickly, and the older hustlers saw potential in his boldness. Wayne walked through Southwest during late evenings like he had something to prove, and people around him noticed how fearless he acted when confronted. By the time he reached his mid-teens, he already carried a presence that made others cautious, and the streets recognized him as someone who reacted quickly and decisively. Washington, D.C. changed dramatically during the early 80s, and the environment created pathways for violent figures to climb toward influence easily. Crack cocaine arrived with speed, and neighborhoods across the city turned chaotic once dealers realized how much money the product generated. The open-air drug market stretched across long blocks where customers formed lines during the afternoon, and police patrols failed to slow the traffic. Shootings became normal around places like Morton Street, 7th Street, and Good Hope Road, and newspapers reported homicides almost daily. The city earned the title murder capital during those years, and residents survived by avoiding certain corners entirely. Witnesses stopped speaking to police because retaliation struck quickly, and officers struggled because informants backed away from cooperating. These conditions created the perfect environment for someone like Wayne because the silence around violent crimes made enforcement nearly impossible. Neighborhood crews across DC fought daily over the money moving through different corridors, and each area had its own players controlling specific corners. Greenleaf and Southwest held older hustlers with deep roots in the community, and First and K and Northwest had crews involved in heavy distribution networks. Trinidad and Northeast operated large open-air markets that attracted customers from Maryland and Virginia, and Southeast held countless small cliques fighting over blocks around Congress Heights and Anacostia. These neighborhoods built their own reputations through violent clashes, and territorial conflicts fueled constant shootings between crews. Wayne understood the layout of DC's street map because he spent years watching older men argue over corners. The structure of these neighborhoods shaped his perspective because he learned early that power came through fear and consistency. The psychology of the streets during the 80s gave Wayne an advantage because DC operated under rules that rewarded dominance. People respected force because nonviolent approaches rarely worked in communities saturated with drug money and unpredictable violence. Fear became a currency because nobody called police when conflicts erupted, and those who built reputations for retaliation gained influence. Wayne thrived under those circumstances because he already believed strength demanded action, and the streets reinforced that belief daily. His willingness to handle confrontations without hesitation made him stand out among young hustlers, and older figures noticed his potential quickly. The environment rewarded men who stayed calm under pressure, and Wayne carried that trait naturally from childhood. DC in the 80s produced legends on every corner because intense violence created stories that traveled far beyond each neighborhood. Wayne fit into that landscape cleanly because he had already spent years building a presence that people respected and feared. Fear built his early foundation, and the city conditions strengthened that foundation because no system existed to slow him down. Police lacked cooperation from residents, and dealers focused more on protecting their money than protecting their communities. Wayne's mindset worked perfectly inside that situation, and the city unintentionally created an ecosystem that embraced anyone who understood how to move without hesitation. During the mid-80s, the streets became even more unpredictable because cocaine money brought outsiders, new weapons, and rising tensions between local crews. Wayne watched these changes closely and adjusted himself as the new environment demanded. His confidence had grown far beyond teenage bravado, and people understood that Wayne responded aggressively when challenged. The fear he generated among younger boys increased significantly, and older hustlers gave him tasks that required absolute certainty. His ability to remain calm during dangerous moments separated him from others, and those traits built the foundation for the man he eventually became. DC's violent climate made someone like Wayne appear larger than life to many residents because the city rarely produced individuals with his mix of toughness and fearlessness. People watched his rise and wondered how far he might go because his name traveled through neighborhoods at a time when communication happened primarily through word of mouth. Every corner carried stories about robberies, fights, and confrontations involving Wayne, and those stories were repeated often. The city shaped him and sharpened him, and he evolved into a force powered by his environment. By the end of the 80s, Wayne had grown into a figure perfectly aligned with the chaos surrounding him, and the streets recognized his potential for greater influence. His presence, joined with the instability of DC's drug economy, created a pathway toward the next stage of his life. He entered that phase carrying everything he learned from Southwest DC, from Georgia summers, and from every fight he survived as a teenager. The city had produced a man who understood violence deeply, and the streets would soon turn him into something far more dangerous. Wayne's time in juvenile detention around 1984 marked a serious shift in the way he moved through the city because he entered that system carrying a story that traveled quickly among inmates. He claimed he killed someone in self-defense right in front of police officers, and he told the story like it proved he never folded under pressure. The details around that killing stayed cloudy, but Wayne leaned into the legend because it helped him build respect inside those detention walls. Officers treated him cautiously, and other juveniles watched him closely since they believed he reacted faster than anyone else in dangerous situations. He stayed locked up for a few years and finally walked out around 1987 as a harder version of himself. When Wayne came home, the streets felt louder and more chaotic than before because DC's drug economy had expanded quickly. Dealers needed people who could protect their money and punish anyone who disrupted business. The drug world operated like a battlefield during that era, and players needed someone who understood fear deeply. Wayne recognized the open lane instantly because he moved with confidence that fit the job. He stopped chasing small hustles and stepped toward murder-for-hire work because he believed that lane offered money, power, and a level of respect that regular hustlers never reached. He took jobs quietly, and word spread among local dealers that Wayne handled business faster than anyone else. Wayne's style separated him from other shooters because he carried a reputation for walking directly toward targets instead of firing from cars or corners. People said he never trusted long-distance shots, and he preferred to close the gap and look men in their eyes before pulling the trigger clean. His method made witnesses freeze because they never expected someone to walk calmly into danger. Police struggled because Wayne never left obvious traces behind him, and the victims rarely saw him coming until he stood close enough to end the situation quickly. He earned a reputation for staying collected during gunfire, and his calm movements during each job made other shooters nervous around him. Wayne rarely bragged about his kills, but his silence carried weight because people filled the gaps with stories. They said he sometimes waited outside buildings for hours without showing frustration, and he approached targets with precision learned from years of watching street conflicts. Older criminals called him dangerous because he carried discipline uncommon for young shooters who acted impulsively. Wayne studied the movements of his targets patiently, and he moved only when he believed the outcome favored him. That made him valuable in a city where fear controlled every interaction. As his reputation grew, younger boys around Southwest and other neighborhoods wanted to stand near him. They saw him as a path toward status, and they followed him closely to learn his mannerisms. Wayne began building a small crew of young shooters who wanted to prove themselves by taking orders from someone respected. He taught them how to stay quiet, how to watch corners without drawing attention, and how to carry themselves around police. He used money to reward loyalty and intimidation to correct mistakes. His personality balanced both approaches because he carried charm when relaxed, but he shifted sharply when business required intensity. Fear became Wayne's strongest weapon, and he understood how to use it without speaking loudly. People crossed the street when they saw him walking, and older criminals respected him because they knew he never hesitated during violent situations. His crew followed his lead because they believed he offered protection from rival shooters. They moved through neighborhoods like a tight unit, and their presence created tension among anyone unfamiliar with Wayne's reputation. Wayne's influence spread beyond Southwest, and other crews started recognizing him even if they never interacted directly. His ability to control younger shooters and stay disciplined during high-risk jobs made him stand out from typical street enforcers. He operated as a lone hitman who ran his crew like a training ground for ruthless specialists. Dealers hired him because he delivered results without unnecessary noise, and his efficiency kept his name circulating throughout the city. The city's violent climate suited Wayne perfectly, and the mid-'80s turned him into a street asset valued by people who needed protection or retaliation. He did not chase recognition, but the streets documented his presence anyway. Every quiet job added another layer to his myth, and every whispered story built his image as a figure who controlled outcomes without explaining his reasons. By the time he reached the late '80s, Wayne had already become a respected hitman, and the city viewed him as someone who mastered the violent currency running through DC. His crew moved behind him with loyalty built through money, fear, and admiration, and he walked through the city knowing his name carried serious weight. The environment prepared him for a partnership that would push his name far beyond local legends, and his hitman career set the stage for the next chapter in his life. Alpo Martinez walked into Washington, D.C. during the late '80s with Harlem swagger, and he carried enough cocaine to shift the rhythm of several neighborhoods quickly. He came from the same New York streets that produced hustlers like Rich Porter and Ozzie Faison, and he learned early how to turn heavy weight into serious money. Harlem recognized him as a flashy dealer with confidence, ambition, and an understanding of how to scale operations beyond local blocks. When he arrived in DC, he understood immediately that the city moved differently because every corner held men who protected their territory with intense loyalty. DC hustlers did not trust outsiders, and newcomers usually faced robbery or violence before earning any position. Alpo needed real protection because he brought large shipments and wanted guaranteed safety while he expanded his business. He searched for someone who created fear naturally, and he wanted a partner who understood the streets with precision. Two different stories exist about the moment Alpo and Wayne crossed paths, and both explanations traveled through DC and New York. With equal strength, Wayne told people he almost killed Alpo inside the East Side Club because the girl claimed Alpo planned to set him up. Wayne explained that he walked straight toward Alpo with full intention to handle the situation until Little Pop intervened and corrected the rumor. According to Wayne, the misunderstanding ended there, but he believed the moment revealed something about Alpo because he allegedly showed fear when confronted. Wayne repeated this version with confidence because he wanted people to understand he never bowed under pressure. Alpo delivered a completely different version to investigators because he claimed he helped Wayne financially when Wayne battled legal issues. He said he paid Wayne's bond money and earned loyalty through that gesture, and he believed Wayne respected his generosity. Alpo made it sound like their relationship formed from transactional trust rather than conflict. Neither story holds definitive proof, and both reflect the pride carried by men living through violent environments. What matters most is that the partnership formed at the exact moment both men needed something the other person supplied. Wayne and Alpo worked efficiently because their strengths complemented one another perfectly. Alpo brought constant cocaine shipments through connections in New York, and he understood how to move weight quickly across multiple neighborhoods. His business skills made him valuable, and his ambition pushed him toward rapid expansion inside DC. Wayne brought intimidation, discipline, accuracy, and the type of fear that turned rivals into silent bystanders. People already whispered his name throughout Southwest and other areas, and nobody wanted conflict with someone who moved confidently during every confrontation. Their partnership created a strong balance because Alpo never feared robbery with Wayne standing beside him, and Wayne never worried about money or resources while managing violent responsibilities. The Martinez organization formed steadily as the partnership matured, and the operation used apartments, vehicles, stash houses, and trusted couriers to protect heavy amounts of cocaine. Alpo controlled the supply and maintained communication with New York contacts, and he moved hundreds of thousands through DC streets regularly. Wayne handled enforcement and acted as the face of intimidation whenever problems appeared, and his presence eliminated theft because local crews feared retaliation. Young hustlers observed the dynamic and recognized the organization as a serious force, and they avoided interfering with its movements. Dealers across Northwest, Northeast, and Southwest understood Wayne represented immediate danger, so they stepped aside when Alpo expanded toward profitable neighborhoods. Wayne kept order through quiet approaches because he did not believe in long speeches or open threats. He rewarded loyalty with cash, clothes, and access, and he punished betrayal instantly without showing hesitation. His discipline impressed older hustlers because he rarely acted recklessly, and his decisions helped the organization operate with consistent stability. Younger shooters followed him because they admired his composure and wanted to prove themselves in his presence. Wayne shaped these men by teaching them how to observe targets, read movements, and control emotions during high-risk situations. The organization functioned smoothly because everyone understood Wayne's expectations clearly. Alpo rewarded Wayne well because he recognized the value Wayne brought to the operation. He supplied Wayne with luxury cars, including a Mercedes 560, and he purchased expensive clothing to reinforce Wayne's image publicly. Alpo wanted Wayne to appear powerful because that appearance protected the business from potential threats. Wayne accepted these gifts because they represented appreciation, and he used them to maintain influence around DC people. Watched him drive through neighborhoods wearing expensive outfits, and they understood he operated at a level far beyond local hustlers. His rise reflected the partnership completely because Alpo's resources and Wayne's enforcement formed a tight structure respected by nearly every crew in the city. The Martinez organization used several neighborhoods as operational points, including areas near Euclid Street, Park Road, and Southwest corridors. Wayne supervised transactions and punished anyone who interfered with shipments, and his ability to remain calm under pressure helped the organization avoid major losses. Alpo focused heavily on distribution and relied on Wayne to manage the violent realities surrounding drug operations. The two men rarely disagreed publicly because each understood the other's importance. Their cooperation produced stability during a period when many crews collapsed under internal conflict. Wayne's reputation grew larger during his years with Alpo because the organization handled conflicts with strategic force, and people respected the precision behind each action. They gained influence throughout DC because both men maintained strong roles, and their organization became one of the most powerful networks operating within the city's drug economy. Dealers realized challenging the partnership brought immediate retaliation, and the silence surrounding their operations increased their effectiveness. Wayne's presence kept the streets quiet around their business, and Alpo's supply kept money flowing through their pockets. The partnership eventually attracted attention from federal investigators who recognized that Wayne's intimidation created a climate where witnesses refused to speak. Alpo's shipments and Wayne's efficiency built a system that worked perfectly for several years, but the success eventually drew federal pressure their way. The connection between the two men formed the foundation for the legal storm that followed, and every event in their lives after this moment emerged from the decisions made during this partnership. DC carried a heavy atmosphere once Wayne began moving deeper into the Martinez organization, and people said his name in low whispers because they understood the consequences of speaking freely. Residents adjusted their routes when they learned Wayne walked in certain areas, and younger hustlers changed their schedules to avoid accidentally crossing paths with him. Conversations shifted quiet whenever his name appeared inside barbershops or dice games, and men who usually bragged loudly about street business lowered their voices quickly. DC's fear did not grow overnight, and it built slowly as bodies connected to Wayne's circle surfaced across different neighborhoods. The entire city knew something dangerous had entered the drug world, and many believed Wayne represented violent certainty that nobody wanted pointed toward them. The murders tied to the Martinez organization unfolded like small stories scattered throughout the early 90s, and each case added another layer to Wayne's reputation. These killings deserve explanation without unnecessary hype because the facts alone carry more than enough weight. The details should be treated like evidence presented carefully because the violence shaped DC history during a chaotic era. The first major killing tied closely to Wayne's name involved Michael Frey Salters, a powerful dealer in the Trinidad area. Frey controlled weight, and he held influence in Northeast DC because his operation generated serious money. His name already appeared inside multiple federal investigations before his death, and other dealers respected him because he survived conflicts that destroyed weaker crews. The story behind Frey's death carries conflicting versions, and those contradictions make the case difficult to place completely on Wayne. Frey was shot on July 17, 1990, and the murder happened during a tense period where several groups fought for territory. Alpo later claimed Wayne killed Frey because he posed a threat to the Martinez organization, and Alpo insisted Wayne removed Frey during a planned hit. Wayne denied the killing consistently, and he said Alpo lied to lessen his own responsibility during cooperation with federal agents. Street accounts say Wayne hunted Frey at one point because someone told him Frey targeted him, yet those accounts never confirmed that Wayne actually pulled the trigger. Another version claimed Alpo arranged the murder and allowed people to assume Wayne did it. The truth remains unclear, and the conflicting stories show how unreliable street narratives can become when major figures protect their pride or shift blame to survive. The second killing tied directly to Wayne involved Domencio Benson, a Brooklyn dealer who traveled through DC occasionally. Domencio came from New York circles that interacted with Alpo, and he visited DC believing old connections still held value. This belief cost him his life because Wayne shot him on July 18, 1991. During a moment when Domencio tried greeting Alpo with a handshake, Wayne walked close and opened fire without hesitation, and Domencio collapsed instantly from multiple gunshot wounds. The execution shocked people because it happened in broad daylight near a busy area of Northwest DC. Wayne confessed to this killing during his plea, and investigators considered this murder direct evidence of Wayne's ability to perform high-risk hits cleanly. The precision and boldness of the act reflected Wayne's training and mindset, and the killing became one of the most widely discussed hits in his record. Garrett Gary Terrell's death highlighted Wayne's loyalty to Alpo more clearly than any other case. Terrell operated as part of Alpo's network until he attempted a major betrayal involving 100 kilograms of cocaine. Alpo learned Terrell planned to steal the drugs and possibly kill him, and he informed Wayne immediately. On October 23, 1991, Wayne confronted Terrell and shot him 7 times in the head. The killing displayed Wayne's close-range method because he approached Terrell calmly and ended the situation directly. Afterward, he removed Terrell's clothes and dumped the body inside Rock Creek Park to delay identification. Investigators found Terrell's corpse in a remote area, and the crime scene reflected clear execution-style tactics. Wayne accepted responsibility for this murder, and prosecutors listed it prominently in his federal indictment because the details fit perfectly with the organization's pattern of retaliation. Evelyn Carter's killing marked one of Wayne's most brazen actions, and the incident happened near the White House after a Keith Sweat concert in July 1991. Evelyn had been cooperating with authorities regarding information connected to the murder of Michael Frey Salters, and word reached Wayne that she intended to speak further with police. Wayne approached her shortly after the concert ended, and he shot her multiple times in the chest and arm on the corner of 18th Street and F Street Northwest. The location shocked investigators because it sat close to several federal buildings, and the shooting happened in an area that rarely saw violent street incidents. Evelyn's death sent a chilling message through DC, and it demonstrated Wayne's willingness to handle threats immediately, regardless of location. Her murder formed a significant part of the federal case against Wayne because it represented retaliation against a potential witness. Another witness killing tied to Wayne's organization involved Yolanda Burley, a young woman from DC who also cooperated with authorities. Federal agents believe she provided information connected to the Martinez organization, and Wayne treated her as a threat. Yolanda died on September 5, 1991, after being shot in the head, and she passed away shortly after arriving at DC General Hospital. Wayne accepted responsibility for this killing in his plea, and investigators described her death as part of a larger pattern of targeting anyone involved in sharing information. Yolanda's killing strengthened the narrative that Wayne operated under strict rules about witnesses, and he eliminated potential informants before they could testify. The killing of Alveda Penny Hopkins reflected the same witness retaliation strategy, but this murder was carried out by Tyrone Ty Price, one of Wayne's close associates inside the Martinez organization. Penny provided information to federal investigators, and she became a target immediately. Price shot her as part of the organization's efforts to silence witnesses, and although Wayne did not personally pull the trigger, investigators treated the murder as part of the coordinated retaliation pattern linked to Wayne's leadership. Penny's death demonstrated the structure around Wayne because his influence encouraged younger shooters to act with similar ruthlessness. The organization handled threats collectively, and Wayne's presence shaped the decision-making behind these killings. Wayne's approach to witnesses represented a consistent strategy rather than emotional reaction. He believed cooperation with authorities threatened the entire operation, and he addressed those threats instantly. His no evidence, no witnesses mindset functioned as a lifestyle because he eliminated problems before they could evolve. Fear protected the organization as much as violence, and Wayne ensured fear traveled across every neighborhood touched by the Martinez organization. Residents across DC understood that speaking to police could end violently, and many avoided involvement in investigations because they understood the consequences. Formed around Wayne's movements, and one widespread rumor claimed he attended funerals of people he killed. People said he showed up dressed sharply and mingled with mourners to observe reactions or speak to women connected to the victims. These stories traveled across DC with speed, and younger hustlers repeated them like they held real truth. The accuracy of these claims remains unclear because street gossip often distorts facts, but the rumors reflect how strong Wayne's presence became in the city. People believed he moved without fear because his actions during violent moments displayed complete confidence. The funeral rumors added to his image, and even though they might carry exaggeration, they contributed to his legend among those who followed his rise. The campaign of violence tied to Wayne and the Martinez organization reshaped Washington, D.C. during the early 90s because the killings demonstrated calculated discipline rather than reckless aggression. Wayne controlled his crew firmly, and his approach to retaliation created a climate where silence felt safer than compliance with law enforcement. The murders produced a chilling effect across DC communities because residents recognized the pattern clearly. Wayne removed witnesses, punished betrayal, and executed targets with precision, and the Martinez organization operated smoothly because people feared stepping into their business. Each body connected to this era strengthened Wayne's image as a figure capable of completing violent tasks without hesitation, and that image made him one of the most feared individuals in the city. The combination of Alpo's finances and Wayne's ruthless efficiency produced a series of outcomes that marked a dark chapter in DC's criminal history. These killings shaped the federal investigation that eventually targeted Wayne directly, and the bodies in the shadows eventually guided investigators toward dismantling the organization. DC started feeling different once the federal government focused on the violence linked to the Martinez organization, and the mood around several neighborhoods shifted quietly because people sensed investigators closing in. Detectives talked to informants almost daily, and one of the biggest breakthroughs came when Nut Watkins flipped under heavy legal pressure. Nut had been involved with hustlers inside the drug world long enough to understand how operations functioned, and he carried information that investigators needed desperately. He started giving details about stash houses, shipments, retaliations, and movements surrounding Wayne and the shooters who followed him. Nut explained how Wayne handled confrontations, and he described the silence that protected the organization for years. Federal agents listened carefully because Nut connected missing pieces that matched timelines from older homicide files. Each interview added clarity, and investigators realized they now possessed someone who understood the internal structure better than anyone previously questioned. More people stepped forward quietly because the atmosphere around DC changed once they learned federal agents wanted Wayne more than anybody. Detectives noticed small shifts in loyalty across the drug world because men who once stayed silent now feared the scale of the investigation. They talked cautiously because they knew Wayne's reputation for retaliation, and they understood that cooperation carried massive risk. Nut remained the main informant because he supplied the largest amount of detail, and his statements started shaping a clear pattern of violence tied to the organization. Investigators finally saw a pathway to build a large federal indictment, and they prepared for the next step. By 1991, the pressure increased significantly because federal agents moved aggressively toward Alpo Martinez, and they tracked his distribution network across DC and New York. Alpo held cash, cocaine, and influence, but he could not outrun the weight of federal surveillance. When armed agents arrested him on serious drug and murder-related charges, the courtroom witnessed a moment that shocked the public. Reporters described Alpo crying during his early hearings because he faced the possibility of capital punishment. His lawyers struggled to control the damage, and they warned him that federal prosecutors prepared to chase the harshest penalties possible. The government believed Alpo directed murders across different states, and they believed those killings connected directly to the drug empire he created. Wayne heard about Alpo's arrest almost immediately because word travels quickly through DC, and he told several associates that he planned to protect Alpo from street retaliation. Wayne made it clear that nobody should target Alpo while he remained in custody, and he wanted rivals to understand that any action against Alpo would bring consequences. People believed Wayne's influence reached courthouses, holding cells, and several neighborhoods because his name carried serious weight. His loyalty toward Alpo remained strong because their partnership shaped his rise, and he remained committed to protecting the man who helped strengthen his position. Federal agents studied Wayne closely during this period because they believed he represented the most dangerous part of the Martinez organization. They knew Alpo supplied cocaine and handled business decisions, but Wayne enforced discipline and maintained fear throughout DC. Investigators considered Wayne nearly untouchable because witnesses refused to speak, and the streets understood the danger connected to naming him directly. Many residents saw Wayne as the harder target because he moved differently, enforced rules with consistency, and carried a presence that scared potential informants into silence. The federal government wanted Wayne more than Alpo for several reasons, and intimidation played a major role in that decision. Prosecutors believed removing Wayne would increase witness cooperation across the city, and they believed taking him down would cripple the entire drug network. They viewed Alpo as the face of the cocaine operation, but they viewed Wayne as the force that kept the network alive through fear. They felt Alpo could be replaced by another dealer, but they believed Wayne represented something deeper because he controlled violence strategically. Alpo saw the situation change rapidly once he faced the death penalty openly, and he realized the government planned to push hard for the harshest outcome. Federal agents spoke to him repeatedly and hinted that cooperation would provide the only realistic path toward survival. The fear of death created heavy pressure, and Alpo weighed his options carefully. He understood the consequences of betraying Wayne, but the threat of execution made cooperation feel like the only possible escape. His decision would permanently reshape the future of the organization, and it would create a chain reaction that hit DC harder than anything the streets expected. Investigators noticed immediate progress once Alpo began speaking privately with federal agents, and they recognized that the net surrounding Wayne tightened with every meeting. The information Alpo supplied supported Nut Watkins' statements, and the government used both accounts to form a stronger case. They built timelines showing Wayne's movements across different neighborhoods, and they compiled lists of individuals connected to violent acts carried out by the organization. They matched phone records, travel patterns, and locations, and they learned how each murder linked to internal decisions made during the partnership. DC felt the shift gradually because fewer people carried confidence in the organization's future, and rumors spread that the investigation reached levels never seen before. Hustlers across the city understood that the partnership between Wayne and Alpo shaped the most violent era in years, and now federal agents wanted to break that structure completely. The streets watched quietly because they sensed something major approaching, and they knew the outcome would change the balance of power across DC. The federal buildup reached a point where nobody could stop the momentum, and Wayne stood at the center of a storm built through years of violence, loyalty, and strategic brutality. The net closed around him slowly, and everyone understood that the next step would shape the future of DC's criminal history. The streets reacted with disbelief when news spread that Alpo turned informant, because many people considered him a fearless figure who stood beside violent men without hesitation. His cooperation deal shocked the entire drug world because nobody expected him to testify openly about an organization built on silence. Alpo sat with federal agents and provided detailed explanations of Wayne's actions, and he listed murders, named victims, and described the tactical reasons behind each killing. Investigators wrote everything carefully because Alpo offered the blueprint needed to dismantle the network that operated across DC. He described how Wayne approached targets, how the crew handled money, and how witness retaliation decisions formed within the organization. Federal agents understood Alpo's cooperation represented a chance to close cases that haunted them for years, and they used his testimony to craft a powerful indictment against Wayne and the shooters who worked beside him. The betrayal cut deep in DC because people realized Alpo abandoned the man who protected him for years. Wayne remained unaware of the full betrayal when police arrested him on a smaller charge involving a simple cocaine sale to an undercover officer. The charge appeared minor on the surface, and Wayne probably expected a quick release or light sentence. The situation changed instantly when federal agents stepped into the room and served additional indictments based on Alpo's cooperation. Wayne understood the game had shifted because federal charges rarely arrived without serious evidence. His arrest created shockwaves through Southwest because people realized the government planned something larger than a standard drug case. Investigators connected Wayne to multiple murders, and they prepared to present an indictment fueled by the stories Alpo delivered during several interview sessions. Courtroom tension rose once prosecutors presented a 27-count indictment linking Wayne to murders, drug distribution, conspiracy, and witness retaliation. The document reflected years of violent incidents stretching across DC neighborhoods, and prosecutors mentioned the possibility of the death penalty because the murders matched federal criteria for capital punishment. Wayne kept a calm expression during court appearances, and reporters noted he rarely reacted to arguments made by prosecutors. The depth of the indictment shocked residents because they never expected federal agents to gather enough evidence to charge Wayne formally. Eric Holder played a key role during the prosecution because he served as United States Attorney for the District of Columbia at the time, and his office pursued the case aggressively. Holder understood how deeply Wayne's violence affected the city, and he believed removing Wayne from the streets would reduce homicides and improve witness cooperation in future cases. Prosecutors connected Wayne's name to killings involving Domencio Benson, Garrett Terrell, and several witnesses, and they structured the indictment to show a pattern of retaliatory violence. Tyrone, Ty Price, and Michael Jackson also faced charges connected to the organization, and prosecutors described their roles during witness retaliation and drug distribution incidents. Price faced scrutiny for his involvement in the murder of Alveda Penny Hopkins, and Jackson faced charges tied to violent acts carried out under Wayne's direction. The federal government presented the case as a coordinated effort by a disciplined organization with Wayne at the center. Courtroom observers described tension whenever Alpo's name appeared during testimony because the betrayal represented the most dramatic shift in the case. Prosecutors prepared to use Alpo's cooperation as the central pillar in their argument because his narrative supported evidence collected across several crime scenes. Wayne watched the case unfold without showing panic, but everyone understood Alpo's decision created a challenge too large for Wayne to defeat alone. The streets responded to the betrayal with judgment, confusion, and disbelief because many people associated Alpo with loyalty until the federal pressure forced him to choose survival. Wayne's arrest marked the beginning of the end for the Martinez organization, and the federal buildup created a chain of events that pushed both men toward irreversible outcomes. The case moved forward with rapid intensity because investigators wanted to prevent any chance of witness retaliation, and they prepared the courtroom for one of the most significant trials in DC's criminal history. The betrayal changed the rhythm of the city because people realized nobody held immunity from federal pressure, and the downfall of the organization proved even feared men could collapse when the right leverage applied. The streets never recovered from the shock, and the entire city understood that Wayne's fate now rested inside a courtroom shaped by the words of the man he once protected. Wayne understood the weight of the indictment once prosecutors confirmed they would pursue capital punishment, and he knew the federal government rarely threatened the needle without preparing to use it fully. The evidence gathered through Alpo's cooperation created serious risk, and Wayne believed the government now held enough information to shape any narrative they wanted. He told several people that Alpo planned to blame him for murders he never committed, and he knew the courtroom favored whoever spoke first with details that sounded believable. Wayne recognized that fighting the case could expose his co-defendants to harsher outcomes, and he disliked the idea of younger men suffering because they followed his lead. Pressure increased daily as investigators collected additional testimony, and Wayne realized that taking the plea offered the only path that guaranteed survival. His lawyers explained the stakes clearly, and they warned him that the government would push the death penalty aggressively. Wayne accepted that punishment for his actions should be heavy, but he refused to die through a process shaped by someone he no longer trusted. He accepted the plea because he believed it protected others and reduced the chance of fabricated stories influencing the outcome. The plea agreement required Wayne to confess to 5 murders connected to the Martinez organization, and the federal judge asked multiple questions before accepting the deal officially. Wayne spoke calmly during the hearing, and he acknowledged his role in the killings listed by prosecutors. The confession shocked people who respected Wayne's silence, and many believed he accepted responsibility because he valued loyalty more than self-preservation. The court sentenced him to multiple life sentences without parole, and he prepared himself mentally for permanent imprisonment. Prosecutors considered the plea a victory because it removed one of DC's most feared men from the streets permanently. Reporters described the courtroom atmosphere as heavy because everyone understood the significance of the decision. DC reacted strongly to Wayne's sentencing because residents spent years hearing stories about his violent actions, and his fall created intense conversations inside barbershops and street corners. Older men compared his downfall to folklore because Wayne operated like a mythical figure for many years, and his reputation grew far beyond the facts available publicly. People described him as a ghost who moved through neighborhoods silently, and his conviction felt like the end of a long era defined by fear and discipline. Younger hustlers used Wayne's story as a cautionary tale because they realized even the strongest figures collapse once federal pressure arrives. His decision to accept life sentences reinforced the idea that the streets never offer permanent success. The legend surrounding him changed shape after the sentencing because people spoke more openly about his actions, and his name became a reminder that violence eventually leads toward isolation and regret. Wayne's fall remained one of the most discussed events inside DC's criminal history, and the aftermath shaped conversations about loyalty, betrayal, and consequences. His name shifted from active fear to historical warning, and people repeated his story to younger generations who believed toughness guaranteed protection. Wayne's sentencing proved that every legend ends once the system builds enough evidence to close the door forever. Wayne entered ADX Florence as a prisoner assigned to total isolation, and the facility kept him inside a single concrete cell for 23 hours every day. The prison used steel doors, narrow windows, and heavy surveillance to restrict communication, and Wayne adjusted slowly to the silence that replaced the noise of DC streets. He spent hours thinking about decisions that shaped his life, and he reflected on people harmed through the violence he carried out. The isolation tested his patience because he experienced few human interactions beyond short conversations with guards. A DX allowed limited recreation inside small outdoor cages, and Wayne used that time to clear his mind and manage the emotional pressure created by confinement. He remained disciplined inside the unit because he accepted the reality of his situation. During his years inside ADX, Wayne joined the Nation of Islam, and he wrote several letters describing his shift in perspective. He explained that time in isolation pushed him towards spiritual reflection, and he used religious study to rebuild his internal discipline. Wayne explored ideas about accountability, and he expressed regret for the pain he caused families across DC. His letters contained short messages encouraging younger men to avoid violence, and he warned readers that the streets never reward loyalty fully. His conversion surprised several people because Wayne rarely discussed religion before imprisonment. The Nation of Islam community inside ADX provided structure and purpose, and Wayne used these teachings to maintain emotional stability during long periods without contact. Rumors began spreading across DC about Wayne's personal life after several statements appeared in online forums and street conversations, and some people speculated about his sexuality based on comments made by former associates. These rumors continued growing because prison culture often weaponizes personal narratives to diminish reputations, and many individuals repeated stories without evidence. The accuracy of these rumors remains unclear because they emerged years after Wayne's conviction, and the information came from sources with inconsistent reliability. These conversations reveal more about prison dynamics than Wayne's character, and they show how easily gossip travels when isolation prevents someone from defending themselves. Despite the rumors, Wayne's place in street mythology grew stronger because people associated him with precision, discipline, and ruthless commitment to the codes he followed. Several rappers referenced him in songs, and magazines wrote articles calling him the Michael Jordan of the murder game. That label reflected the extreme reputation surrounding Wayne's actions, and it demonstrated how deeply his legend penetrated American street culture. Documentaries and street DVDs featured interviews with people who knew him, and those interviews helped spread his story beyond DC. Men who never met Wayne still repeated his name when describing high-risk situations because they believed his discipline represented the highest level of street efficiency. Wayne's influence reached younger generations who study crime stories on YouTube and social media, and his legend continued growing because the details of his actions carried an unusual level of precision. Even people who disliked him respected his ability to operate in dangerous environments without fear, and his reputation became a case study inside conversations about violence and loyalty. His myth survived longer than the organization itself because people repeated his story often, and they treated him as an example of what power looked like during DC's violent era. Street mythology tends to elevate figures whose actions shape multiple neighborhoods, and Wayne fits that pattern perfectly. He represented brutality, strategy, silence, and discipline, and those traits define the most dangerous men inside the drug economy. People who grew up during the late 80s or early 90s remember the fear surrounding Wayne clearly, and newer generations hear those memories through documentaries and street interviews. The legend refuses to fade because DC still feels the impact of the violence that shaped Wayne's rise, and communities continue discussing the lessons created by his story. Wayne's time in ADX Florence continues quietly, and his isolation prevents public appearances or interviews. His letters circulate occasionally among those who knew him personally, and his name appears in conversations whenever people discuss the most feared figures in American street history. The legend remains alive because people treat Wayne as a symbol of an era defined by heavy violence and strict survival codes. He exists inside a concrete cell, but his story grows outside because the streets never forgot what he represented. Alpo walked out of federal custody during 2015, and his return to Harlem created heavy conversations because people wanted to know how he moved freely after confessing to multiple murders. He rode bikes through Harlem streets confidently, and videos showed him smiling while people whispered behind their phones. The city watched him closely because they understood his history, and they wondered if old decisions would follow him home eventually. When Alpo died on Halloween morning in 2021 after being shot on Frederick Douglass Boulevard, the internet moved fast with speculation, and countless people immediately connected his death to Wayne without any proof. Rumors spread quickly because the streets love stories that sound dramatic, and people believed Wayne still controlled influence from his concrete cell. No evidence supported that idea, and investigators confirmed zero links between Wayne and the Harlem shooting. Public perception twisted the story because people wanted symbolism, and they treated Alpo's death like the final chapter of an old betrayal. Reality stayed simple because Alpo died in a situation unrelated to Wayne, yet people refused to separate legend from facts. Older DC voices discussed Wayne's story after Alpo's death because younger people misunderstood the environment that produced him. OGs explained that Wayne grew inside a violent city shaped by crack, poverty, and unstable neighborhoods, and they said his toughness came from a world where weakness cost lives. They described the Southwest blocks during the late 70s and early 80s with heavy detail because that era built the mindset Wayne carried forever. They said he learned early that silence protected families and retaliation protected reputations. They explained how loyalty operated differently back then, and men believed the violence held value because other resources felt limited. Older men wanted younger listeners to understand the emotional cost behind the reputation, and they warned them that Wayne's story should not inspire imitation. They explained that Wayne mastered survival inside a system designed to swallow young black men, and they said he played a role created by the environment surrounding him. Younger viewers who never lived through that era gained context from these explanations, and they understood that Wayne's actions came from a dangerous period rather than random decisions. Wayne's final chapter represents a message repeated across countless street stories because the streets never love anybody, and loyalty to violence only delivers pain. Eventually, Wayne walked with confidence during his years in DC, but those choices placed him inside a forever sentence surrounded by concrete and silence. The violence that earned him respect closed every path toward peace, and the code he lived by trapped him permanently. DC remembers Wayne because fear shapes memories stronger than anything else, and older residents recall how people moved differently once his name appeared in conversations. They remember the quiet tension around certain neighborhoods, and they remember the silence witnesses maintained whenever killings occurred. His removal from the city changed the atmosphere, yet his presence stayed inside every story told by people who lived through those years. Wayne became a ghost inside DC history because his legend stretches across generations, and newcomers learn his name long after the man himself disappeared from public sight. His story remains alive because people use it to explain violence, loyalty, pride, and consequences. His influence never faded completely because the city shaped him deeply, and many residents still speak about him carefully. Wayne's name stays present inside conversations about street history because people treat him as a symbol of an era defined by relentless violence and deep fear. His choices removed countless opportunities from his life, and they placed him inside a world where reflection became his only companion. He stands as proof that the streets always collect payment from everyone, and nobody escapes that truth forever. He built a reputation that traveled farther than anyone expected, and the ghost of that reputation remains stronger than the man behind it. The city moved forward without him, yet his shadow stayed behind as a reminder of what happens when violence becomes identity. Wayne's story ends inside a cell, but the legend continues walking through conversations across DC. That cold interrogation room feeling returns now because the legend begins and ends with whispers. Some names grow louder once the world locks them away, and Wayne Perry became one of those names. His story shaped Washington, DC through fear, loyalty, and calculated violence, and the city still carries that memory quietly. His life shows how choices echo long after the man disappears, and his ghost remains part of DC history without any drama needed.